Hi, how are you? Welcome to the academic conference Safeguarding Press Freedom in Journalist Unsafety, the perspective from the academic world, performed in the framework of the commemoration of the Day of Freedom in Journalism. The branch here in Chile and the hosting universities of this event, the Faculty of Communication and Image from the University of Chile and the Faculty of Communication from Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, we welcome you. We will begin the session with welcoming remarks from Dr. Magdalena Saldaña, academic from our university and director from the Millennium Corps for the Studies of Policies, Public Opinion, and Media in Chile. A big round of applause, please. Thank you, Isidora, and thanks everyone for being here today. It is the first presentation we have after the interventions from the authorities, so we are very happy. And I will introduce myself, Magdalena Saldaña, Director Associated to MEPOL Núcleo Millennium Core. And this is a panel of researchers, men and women, part of MEPOL, presenting today different studies we have published with data from Núcleo Millennium. We also have a special guest that will also be part of the presentation, Dr. Natalia Ruete, and she is professor in Argentina and very kindly has accepted our invitation to be part of the MEPOP presentation. So I insist, if you're here today, it's because you are interested about the topics related to the Núcleo. So I invite you to follow the activities from Núcleo in the social media and the website. So without further more, we will start. I give back the floor to Isi. So thank you so much. Well, before I begin the session, I want to ask, please, if you have any questions during the development, to take notes on them on papers. Josefina will be providing those papers, and in the end of the conference, we'll be able to have the opportunity to ask all questions. So let's start. This is a panel titled Journalism, Lack of Information or Disinformation in Difficult Times. We will have 5 presentations, and each presentation will be top 10 minutes. And I will let the speakers know when you have 3 to 1 minute to finish and when you need to finish your lecture. We will start with a presentation titled The World Seen from the Left Party and the Right Party. What is El Mercurio's position? With Dr. Natalia Reguete from the National University from Quilmes and CONICET, Argentina. A big round of applause for her. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I truly appreciate so much the invitation, the possibility of being able to participate from this event and meet friends, all the fellows from Chile that I love so much. So I'm gonna go really fast because I do have many results from a wider research that we have been doing with Ernesto Calvo. Where should I? With Ernesto Calvo, where we're studying polarization, media, and social media. In this case, we're interested in observing, well, not so much the location of the media when thinking about their own decision making in the editorial, but how do we, the consumers, perceive them? And for that, I want to base my work in 2 theoretical perspectives. One of them is assimilation and contrasts. One is assimilation and contrast, and the other one is the effect of the media. I will go straight to the results. What we did in this case in a wider survey, where we also included several experiments. What we did in this case was asking the people that made the survey, where do they position themselves in the ideological aspect? This is something we can see in this line. And where do they visualize the media? Also in the ideological spectrum. One is more on the left, more progressive, 7 more on the right, or more progressive. So one of the theoretical ideas here is if the line goes from left bottom or right and the upper side, means that as we go to the right side, the perception we have on the media also goes to the right. A line that goes on this sense shows similarities, meaning the media moves as we move towards the right or the left. But a line that goes from left on the top and the right to the bottom means that every time we move towards the right position, the media is visualized more on the left area. Now, what do we see here? In the case of El Mercurio, if we make a differentiation between voters from Boric and Cast, we see that we have similarities and contrasts. The voters identified more with Cast go towards the right and move the media along with them. There are similarities between El Mercurio and those who voted for Cast, but those who voted for Boric are contrasted with El Mercurio because the more they move towards the left, they see El Mercurio more on the right position. That's why the red line initiates these voters that self-position themselves in one, but see El Mercurio almost in a seven, meaning very much on the right side, on the right wing. Now, the interesting thing is that this is much more obvious when making a differentiation between voters that voted for rejection or approval in the plebiscite of 2022. And also, they see El Mercurio much more on the right side, more than El Mercurio. So the average is above a average position that would be on a more central area. So what do we see here? We see similarities with voters from the right side, those who chose rejection, and a contrast between voters from the left wing that voted for Boric and approval, with a highest level of polarization in the case of voters, those who voted in the plebiscite. Now, the interesting thing with La Tercera is that if we make a differentiation between those who voted in the plebiscite between approval or rejection, they are all contrasted. Both lines go from the top to the right, to the bottom, to the left. There are no borders. If we consider the plebiscite assimilated similar to La Tercera, we see a very much sensitive line, much more a deeper line from those who approve the plebiscite, and a flat line, more less sensitive in the differences that the voters have. Those who voted for rejection related to the editorial position, the standing from the right wing. When looking at these differences, what we observe in the people that made the survey is that they feel that La Tercera is advocating for the enemy. They are biased in an inverse way, different to the interest or the type of things that we are interested, opposite to them, to the position that you truly have regarding social political reality and so on. Same thing happens with Televisión. All voters, even the independent ones, which are this gray line, are contrasted with Televisión, meaning they have a line, a reverse line that goes on the opposite side to me, to my position, ideological position. So what's the interesting thing on this? In the case of Televisión, the average says that Televisión is seen as a relatively central type of media. However, they're all contrasted with Televisión. There's no similarities with television, meaning that it does not guarantee the fact that a media wishes to position themselves in, or wishes to have an editorial line in the central area. So we believe it's a central area. And finally, so you don't say that I have to finish because that's usually a bit annoying. We say that when the media are contrasted consistently, we feel that they're playing for the enemy consistently, that they are far away from us. And they have, and also that that damages their reputation. It's not only if we feel represented or identified with what the media is talking about, connected to our concerns, but also we also feel that are uh, they have been bought, that they are advocating for something different. They are mercenaries. They are not managed by the criteria of news, but better yet, motivated by money and different interests. The second thing, having a centrist position does not guarantee being visualized as centrist. Wanted to be everybody's media, or the media that truly speaks about the reality, or that truly goes to the reality and the truth, doesn't guarantee that they will be visualized as such. Another thing, the social polarization levels are very strong, and they are even stronger and more sensitive than the levels of polarizations that we observe in the media themselves. And because it's also, well, also those medias depend deeply on the levels of consumption that societies have in order to survive, with which they cannot stop dealing with that aspect. And finally, the similarities and contrasts. How close to us are they when we assimilate a media, or how much we expel this in terms of ideological terms when we make a contrast with this media has a huge impact in the level of reputation we assign to this media. The level of reputation, reliability, credibility, they decrease when we feel contrasted. So the idea that the media, as Camila Vallejos just said, are one of the institutions that are being seen as institutions that we don't trust in. And that is partly related to levels of polarization that we have in societies, and with the sensitivity this implies in terms of how and when and how reliable the media is. Thank you, and thank you for the possibility of being here. Thank you so much, Doctor, for this presentation. Now we will listen to the presentation El Mercurio Lies, and all the others also lie. Some notes to recover the reliability of authorities: Claudia Lagos from Universidad Chile, and Daniela Lascano from Universidad Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is like a stand-up comedy thing, and I'm not that funny. So it's always a pleasure. I'll try to be summarize as much as I can. Thank you so much for being here. It's Saturday morning. This is hallucinating, really. And thank you so much to the organizing committee, to all the organizers, and Isidora that has coordinated this panel with much due diligence. So what I wanted to say is that I'll try to focus very briefly on some context elements and the work that we have been doing in MEPOP, and specifically this one. This is a work in progress. There we go. Among many other things that were told this morning, and many of you know much about, you're familiarized with this, there's a mistrust that is generalized in the institutions. And the media, of course, is also related in general terms, not only in Chile, but it's a phenomenon that has different tones in different places, but it's something that all societies somehow share. This is a presentation based in focal groups that we have men and women from the medium sectors in the capital, from Chile, the metropolitan region, and we explore the features, the different attributes that these audiences value in journalists and the media, to wonder ourselves if there's criticism and mistrust. What can the audience value in a better way for the role of journalists and the media? Thinking about contributing to the discussion from the execution of journalism that somehow connects and fits and is receptive to what is actually being claimed by or asked by or perceived by the audiences. Four very key elements in this context is related to the mistrust of the media. There's a profession that is under judgment. Jimena Orchat from Santiago's University has been working on how this role, this authority has been lost. Epistemological authority of communication and journalism has been lost as entities and mediators, curators that somehow allow to participate to the audiences in the citizen with the citizenship in the public debate and this criticism in the last 4 years have become very acute, especially in the case of the social modernizations. But not only that, there are several opinion surveys that have showed and talked about this. So some of the things that are related with this last dimension, different reports and different elements and surveys, they recognize there is a poor development in national journalism. They do not trust in news. You can see the percentages. They vary, but usually high. Just a third of these people that took the survey rely on the Chilean media. And one of the things that were mentioned by Professor Valenzuela in the lecture this morning, how citizens, men and women, even avoid access to information. We avoid the news. The levels of trust also vary. The radio has a better performance, but it's not so good. So we have some key concepts, some axes that articulate this work. Daniela will be available furthermore in the case of the results. This is the social role of journalism, the regulations regarding the theory of press, the role of journalism, the connection with democracy, and how this happens, how these concepts revolve in a context of information. Now, the objective of the work that we are here to present is related to how, when facing the questioning of the audiences, we expect to identify some features, some practices from citizens, men and women in the metropolitan region that would value as trust attributes in journalists. So trying to expand or move forward, and it's a little bit similar to what the minister said, like what do we do? How do we go from the diagnosis to certain work lines? The methodology detailed in this screen. We work with focal groups, meaning we call upon several, well, separated men and women, between 8 to 10 participants per group. We had a guideline, semi-structured guideline that wishes to approach these three dimensions, the previous ones, among others, of course, but for this presentation, these three ones are the core. Recruitment was done with an agency specialized in this. And in general, the waving was 75 minutes conversation. That was the average. That's an interesting thing. We'll dive in the end. This is related to the value, the valorization of those participating in these focal groups on this conversational space of being asked, being inquired on this type of topics, right? So there is a dimension, an interest on the citizenship, men and women, of discussing, reflecting. It's not there's apathy on this, but for this, Daniela will be able to dive in a little bit more in the key part. No, that was the important part. This generates a lot of expectations, sorry. At the beginning of the presentation, perspicacious journalists said that, well, it's not Claudia Lagos and me as authorities and so on, but this is because the results that we are presenting are part of a very larger focus group work where we have Camila Horta, Daniela Gaston, and Claudia Ageis. And one of the things that we are developing here, this is related with a more emerging vision and what are the voices that appears in these focus groups that tries to explain what had happened with these groups that we interview. One, a group of men that voted for rejection, a group of women that voted for rejection, and a group of men and also women that voted approval in both cases. And so we were trying to dive in the connection between information consumption and this voting decision and the perception they may have on the constituent the whole process. So we see mistrust, and mistrust not only in the media, but also in the institutions, and even the mistrust in themselves. We won't be speaking about that because we're working on this in another work in progress. But yes, we will begin with one of this data because we have three dimensions that we will talk about in these presentations, because from those results and for this work with Claudia, it was interesting to us that there are some lectures that these audiences have on the media. All this framework that there's mistrust on the media, but there are things that the audiences say about why they don't trust the media, and also what would make them trust in the media. So, as a first element in this framework, this lack of trust that is generalized in the media, out of that, A lot has been said, and it is an idea that has been placed in the surveys, in the academical work, and perhaps even in more social type of this a more social focus. So why a mistrust in the media? This idea that the press lies. That's why we titled this presentation by using this sentence from El Mercurio lies, but apparently not only El Mercurio, but all the others. So we do have this idea that the media lies, it is not free press, they are conditioned by different interests. In some cases, from editorial lines, political interest, and so on. Isidora, I don't see you. And this idea, it's that the media somehow do not provide information in a truthful way, but they manage this according to some specific conditions. So now we go to the core of this work. What would this mistrust attributes could be? I mean, where does this lie? And what we see here is there's more affinity, more coherence, more by gender than by voting. Because men, for instance, in both cases, focus their questioning or mistrust attribute with this idea that the media, it's a farandula of the contents, the policies, and also in general. I'm going to be doing a spoiler on the elements related to the results. It is when this audience on the focus group will freely ask about their perception, media, and journalism. The answer was focused not only in general press, but a specific format. Can you guess which one? TV. Yes, that's it. That is what that focuses their appreciation, and also specifically in the morning shows. There are very interesting works. We will be presenting more results on those morning shows, probably in different panels. But this idea, this imaginary that associates the idea of journalism and the media in TV, and the role of journalists in TV and women, focus their mistrust in this idea that journalists have biases, the journalists are not objective, and journalists sometimes do not question. Women voting approve have this idea, but journalists do not ask, do not question. They are not doing an inquisition. And the women that have voted rejection will focus this in this idea that journalists are not objective, the journalists have many biases, and so there's a reading, ideological reading on those contexts, on those contents. So what could happen will be the trust attributes related. What should happen for these audiences to trust in the media, in the communication media? Well, for men, the key thing is to have empathic, funny people, charismatic people, very much associated to the face that they see on the TV. It is not enough for them to be well read or intelligent, but fun. And is I'm gonna trust if I have an ideological connection. Not only that, but a different type of connection. It's very interesting, this similarity, and also in women, this idea of journalists, the brave one, the inquisitor that may ask questions, but it's also neutral, objective. It's very interesting how has this idea has set of being objective connected to journalism, despite all the academical revisions we might be doing. It's very well set, this idea in the citizenship. I'll go really fast to speak about some of the conclusion on this idea that I mentioned before, that these audiences value the impartiality, neutrality, lack of bias on the profession, this role, disseminative role of journalists, but also that journalist that questions things and makes inquisitions on topics. And sometimes people said, I don't know, I've never really liked this journalist, but now he was questioning this politician from right wing, and now I realized that he's completely different. And throughout all of his career, I thought he was from a different editorial line. So this idea of homogeneity in TV, this idea of no, I don't watch TV, but when thinking about journalists, I think about TV, and I think a lot about the format of the morning shows. And I'll go to this last one that we were highly interested with Claudia. We really wanted to talk about this, to remember that the audiences participating in this focus group are from groups on medium groups, no political militants, but there's an idea on the communication media. There is some idea on a discourse of what they understand and also the expectations that they have on the communication media. And what we're highly interested on the media and the participation of the focus, perhaps there's a clue on where to move forward in journalism and the communication media, this idea of the interest and the value that is provided to the communicational space and dialogue spaces. Because when speaking that the policy of information has been trivialized, it's because it is a debate that is not being heard, and that takes us to a good port in terms of understanding. That's it. Thank you so much. You can follow us on the social media.
Thank you so much to all the speakers for keeping up with the time, which is very valued at this time. We continue on with the presentation, which is called Generalized Insecurity and Promotion of Gender Gaps, the Impact of Social and Healthcare Crisis in the Exercise of Journalism in Chile, from Daniel Grasau, Constanza Ortega, Soledad Puente, and William Brett from the Catholic University of Chile. Now we will hear from our faculty, Daniela Grasal. Thank you. The floor is yours. Thank you. I will try my best to take only 10 minutes. And this is a paper that was conducted in the framework of two different crises that the Chilean society and Chilean journalism went through simultaneously or very close one to the other. For those of you that are not from Chile, in 2019, in October, there was a social movement, a political crisis that was translated in a number of demonstrations, protests, social demonstrations, and direct action against inequality, against a number of political actions, against the system of healthcare, of pensions in Chile, against the educational system in Chile, and it put the entire country in a situation that was highly stressful during several months, and it was abruptly cut by the start of the pandemic in March of 2020. And I know that these are completely different events. We studied journalism during times of crisis, during times of disaster. But what's interesting is that when we did this work, and it was precisely around the time of the demonstrations, and we had started doing focus groups and interviews in depth, and we had a fund that was granted to do this, and we worked interviewing journalists and editors throughout the process, and in their narrative we were able to consolidate between November 2019 and of 2021, and now in 2023-24 we conducted more interviews, and we got to over 200 interviews, and these two time periods sort of overlap in the discourse, in the narratives, in the memories, especially when the interviews took place during 2019, during 2020, during 2021. Whereas nowadays, when we interviewed people again to understand how the pandemic, how the social demonstrations had an impact over freedom of press, gender gaps, and the exercise of journalism, there is the ability of looking back and separating both events. Whereas when we conducted the interviews during that time frame, it was impossible to distinguish both. The strength, the depth of the trauma for the exercise of journalism was too strong. In that sense, a very strong concept that came up was the concept of security and insecurity, or unsafetiness. And in this case, we are looking at the wording of UNESCO, understanding the conditions and capacities of journalists to carry out their work, receiving, producing, sharing information without exposure to specific risk of intimidation, threats, harassment, and violence. This is a definition that has been looked at, and its counterpart of insecurity or unsafe conditions is thought of traditionally for a certain journalist, for a certain context, for war journalism, for organized crime journalism, for journalists exposed to kidnapping, forced disappearance, tortures, and lately we've seen in the major conference or within the framework of this commemoration of the Day of the World Press Freedom, we've heard stories of Gaza, of Sudan, and other places that actually aim at this insecurity or unsafe conditions that for many of us we have never been in. And when we study this in the context of journalism, we always think about the economic precariousness or the lack of security in your labor, the fact that you don't know whether you will continue to have a job and an income, whether you will be able to do that or you will have to work doing other things to make a livelihood for yourself because the work of journalism is paid poorly, it is not safe at all, not secure at all. And we have seen that this idea of insecurity or unsafetyness is something that causes physical, emotional consequences over people, over journalists, over the media at the end of the day never or did not have much to do with the type of journalist or with the economic or financial situations, but this was something that affected everyone, that affected all the professionals of the different areas. We saw people, for instance, that were doing coverage of different shows, and they stopped doing that for this many years because they were supposed to cover other stories. So the reflection that came up was looking at this concept and expanding it to look at actions or measures that are preventative to better prevent a situation that without a doubt was unexpected. When we talk about insecurity, we talk about people that felt uncertainty in a context of deep uncertainty. They were not aware, they did not know what was going to happen the next day because of the context, because of the political actions, because of the constitutional process that we were undergoing at that moment. Nobody knew whether they were going to be able to go outside because there was a possibility of catching the virus. So the feeling of uncertainty was huge. The feeling of vulnerability was huge. I am exposing myself to damage, and not only myself, but also the people around me. So fear became a key element and the narrative of the journalists. Now, as we look back, what we were coding, and we just submitted a paper about this, and the main idea was fear. Fear that had concrete reasons, afraid of going outside, afraid of being hit by a stone, afraid of being hit by a bullet, a rubber bullet from the police forces, afraid of being attacked. Some people talked about security measures within the media, talking about military staff surrounding them because the media became targets of attacks. Fear from the digital world, too. The feeling of vulnerability when they would say things that they were not sure whether people wanted to hear that or not. That feeling was very, very strong, and it only became stronger for women. We have a number of interviews in which we were able to see the fear, evidence of the fear, not only fear of being cancelled, so to speak, which is something that kept coming up, but also fear for concrete threats and physical risks. People said I was doxed. They knew the subway station that I was going on. They knew my address, etc., etc., and that turned into self-censorship. And the impact of trauma over the mental health of journalists was very high. And now we look at it from afar, but at that moment, people were telling us about using drugs to manage their psychological symptoms, that they were taking medications. One person said, my hair started falling off. I was sick and I was under so much pressure that I got sick. And it had an impact over their families too. The entire family was upset because of the social demonstrations. They couldn't go outside because of the pandemic. They did not know whether the journalist work was going to affect them, and women are more affected because at the end of the day they had to address this, and at the same time they were removed from several activities. People would say, let's not send them outside because something could happen to them. It's better that men go cover certain things, and that causes consequences in the coverage too. And then throughout the pandemic, it was not even don't go outside, it was better stay at home because you have children, you have families to take care of, you are caregivers. So they were even more removed from the journalist activities, and on top of so many other gaps that we have mentioned in other instances. And to wrap up, in the one last minute that I have, this is a paper that shows, and the idea is to talk about this later. And we have a full day ahead of us. If you happen to run into me, let's have a conversation, okay? There was a lack of protocols, and it always happens whenever there are events. When we studied the earthquake of 2010, there were no protocols in the media to face a situation like the earthquake. And usually there is a reactive management, there is a management. It is not efficient, and it only increases the physical, social and emotional impact over journalists that don't have any type of support to give coverage to the news, and they are afraid. They don't dare asking for support, the help that they need, because they will look like the weakest link of the chain. So there is this trust in the processes, and people would say, I better keep it to myself. I will get the medication and I will continue working on through it. And there was a huge impact over the type of coverage of the news. We are also working to study that. There is another paper to address that and how it changed how things were covered, especially in the case of women and how they were removed, how the subject of the interview were moved away. And we call it the self interview, where ultimately the interview subject sort of sends an audio of what they want to say, and that's it. Nobody can ask back or challenge anything of what they say, and that has an impact over the quality of the information. And also self censorship, fear for harassment, an overload of work for certain groups, and the expansion of the gender gaps, and usually normalization of risk as something that just happens, that is not necessarily normalized. And what do we do so that in those moments of risk exposure, there are actual actions to make sure that the coverage of the news, that the work that is conducted is of the highest quality and actually fulfills what we want to do to promote freedom of expression, freedom of press, the exercise of democracy, which is what calls us today. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Grasal, for this very interesting presentation. Now we are going to continue on with the presentation. Deceitful content in encrypted platforms in Chile. WhatsApp versus Telegram during the elections of the members of the Constitutional Council of 2023 from Marcelo Santos, Universidad de Computares, and Guillermo Bustamante, Universidad de los Andes. We are going to hear Dr. Marcelo Santos. Please approach the floor. Hello, thank you so much. It's good to see a crowded room. First of all, I want to fix a mistake because Antonia Flores and Jorge Luis Ortiz Fuentes also worked in the data collection, and sometimes you just send an abstract and you're in a hurry, and I apologize. Antonia is here. I did not give them credit. And I will start with a different approach to the idea of the press freedom from the perspective of the relevance of the information or the integrity of the information, which is something that depends on the source of information that you use. And I will address something that is not necessarily press but is a source of information. What we did was to take in the context in which there was a very important use of texting technologies. Sebastian talked about WhatsApp as a platform which is not intervened by the algorithm, but it is a platform in which people exchange information. And the digital use report indicates that one of every three Chileans follows the news through WhatsApp, for instance. And in other places, it has had a very important effect, for instance, in the case of Brazil, as well as other events. And we started conducting a monitoring and following what's going on in WhatsApp and also in Telegram to see for the first time a comparison between both, understanding that Telegram in other places has had, like in the US, for instance, or in Brazil, it has had a spike in terms of its use for the coordination of attacks and also political articulation of extreme right movements. And it actually started we started looking for extreme movements of the right wing. We did not find any extremist left wing movements in Telegram. And on the other side, the academic team, upon a first attempt, at least of what I know in the region, tried to conduct a comparison of what happens in terms of political information in both platforms. And these are platforms that have similar functionalities and they have different levels of popularity among the users, and we wanted to see what was going on in both. And these are some of the concepts, and I will quickly run through this to move to the results. And the questions were the following. First of all, what is the type of information that is disseminated among those platforms? Secondly, what is the magnitude of the misinformation? So, we conducted a content meta analysis using a number of words, and we took as a case the elections for the second constitutional process that failed too in the country and that went through this period of electoral campaign. And during that period, we took a sample of WhatsApp groups of political articulation that we had from the 2021 presidential elections, and through Telegram, we were using keywords to find other groups of political articulation. And so we got to a sample of 80 something. Some of those were not necessarily too active or too political, they were more conspiracy against vaccines based. So we ended up with a sample of a large number of messages and groups, and we searched for the most viral and most repeated messages many times in many groups. Because when we talk about information, it does not matter that one person speaks, it matters that the information gets disseminated. That was our methodological grounds for this. And technically, we were able to find similar messages. And let's pay attention to this. Some people would say, look at this, and it's one message. And people would say, look at this, and it's a very same message. So we found 95% of matches. Of course, of a large sample, we got to a just a feasible sample to code manually, and that is what we were able to do with almost 600 messages overall. As you see, much less in Telegram than in WhatsApp, which came to show that Telegram is not used as much in that context. However, these are not representative samples. This is just a work of exploration. There are so many things to talk about. We are not accounting for the entire Chilean society, not even close to that. This is just a first approach. And the only common thing is that the groups have a certain interest in politics and they're not on the same platform, and maybe there's even an overlap of people in the different groups, and there are a number of things that we do not know. So this is just a first approach. Hopefully you, myself, other colleagues can start to build on top of that, but this is just a first approach. So as I was saying, WhatsApp or our strategy who here uses WhatsApp? Or many people don't know. We were looking for public groups, for instance, Chile Patriots, and we joined. These groups have no filter whatsoever. The link is publicly available. There's no need for a moderator to approve you joining the group, even though sometimes people would say, "Who is this person?" And sometimes you're kicked out because you're not intervening. So we had a user that was created. I'm not going to say fake user, but it was a user created specifically to join the different groups that are publicly available. And little by little, we joined different groups and we were able to have this snowball effect. And we got to more or less 400 groups at that point. And in Telegram, it's a different story because public groups are in a directory that you can look and sort through using the same tool. Even the sampling processes are different, but that is what the platforms allowed for. After this process, this is a total number of messages, 10,000 over here, almost 30,000 over here. In terms of chats, these are the messages because Telegram uses groups and channels. These are per users, messages, chat, messages, user, and that is another important methodological aspect. So, first of all, is it political or not? Within a political group, there are things that are not necessarily political that are shared, and also to see how intensely political is the group. And we found similar groups a little bit more in WhatsApp in comparison to Telegram, and in this case, this sample of political messages led to us asking ourselves as to whether they were about the elections or not, because we had 2 months up until the elections. And as you see in Telegram, there were much less than in WhatsApp, which is very interesting, that I will explain later on. Now, regarding what was political, very little around the elections in Telegram, a little bit more, almost 50% in WhatsApp regarding this issue. In this case, the types of political information we distinguish between opinion, mobilization, misinformation, information, or this is what we should value, right, as journalists, and civility and creative content like jokes and so on and so forth. In the first place, we see the opinion for both platforms, comparing WhatsApp and Telegram. WhatsApp on top, Telegram down below, and opinion was much of what we found. Misinformation was in the second place in terms of information that was not verifiable. This is a comparison in terms of the elections and political not elections to account for the political situation at that moment. First of all, there was an increase, a significant increase of the rate of opinions in Telegram, whereas in the groups of WhatsApp there was a little bit more of information and no misinformation about the elections in Telegram. So it would seem to be that in the context of the Telegram groups, there was a different orientation. It's not necessarily about the political situation at that moment, whereas in the long run, more conspiracy theories, more rejecting of communism and other broader ideas than the uh, particular situation. Whereas in WhatsApp, people were saying, is the vote valid or not? Should you um, vote for this or that person? And in terms of misinformation, there was fake information, there was uncheckable and misleading information, more or less one third of each. In case of Telegram, there was no information about the elections, but in terms of political information, we found almost two-thirds of information that was uncheckable, and that is quite a difference. That led us to believe that the content was more based on conspiracies, and this is just an example of each. This is the message that was disseminated the most among WhatsApp messages. And there was another one. Maybe this is the second or third, if I remember correctly. Everything has been pre-arranged. They only need the people to go validate the constitutional fraud. And the other message on Telegram is we are at war, and it's more of a delusional content. It's It's a message that's highly spread among WhatsApp groups, and that is all. And these are the takeaway points because I'm running out of time, and there are differences, right? WhatsApp seems to be revolving around political situations. In the long run, it is less damaging in that sense, even though there's a lot of misinformation. And Telegram revolves more around conspiracy theories, anti vaccine movements, the elections of Trump, and with the things that happen here in Chile, which is difficult to understand. And Telegram is not widely used in Chile, but still, people were talking about the military coup, so that's not something we can also just ignore and dismiss. It's not something that's unrelevant. And that is all I wanted to share with you. We can continue conversation later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Santos, for this very important research. We will now go to the last presentation titled Digital Environment and Disinformation in a Polarized Chile, a qualitative approach from authors María Isabel Pávez, Universidad de los Andes, Magdalena Saldaña, Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, Cristian Cabalín, Universidad de Chile, and Dr. Sherman, that will be joining us in these opportunities for this lecture. A big round of applause, please. Hi, thank you so much. I'm going to be brief because I know we are very much tight on time. So, this is part of a project we have been doing, guided by Isabel Pavés. It is a series of focuses done last year, 10 in total, in order to have an approach, a qualitative approach to what was happening. We've done some surveys on the first year, but the idea is to be able to have this qualitative approach that is intense and also at some point start doing some mixed research. Okay, so in general, most of the studies of public opinion are usually quantitative. We're used to the surveys and analysis, quantitative analysis. And what we wanted was to study, in the Chilean case, was how a scenario that is polarized. Actually, the different surveys, our own surveys, show us high levels of polarization. How can you visualize this from the qualitative perspective, a more emotional perspective, more related to conversation with the closest areas, etc.? So that is what we collected during this research. As I said, we all know that since 2019 and 2023, well, it could be before 2006 and 2011, but since 2006 to 2023, has been mobilizing many elections, historical elections in that period, including everything related to the two failed constituent process. Now, this is something I'll go fast on this topic, but there's a very wide literature that has tried to study the roles of the media, the communication medias in the public opinion processes. How it happens, is it possible or not having a deliberation process, especially in a Habermas type of a sphere? And also, they have emphasized the role that the elite plays in the formation of these processes. You might think about Lippmann, one of the first ones that worked from that perspective. That book, it's like 100 years old. And then more recent authors, such as the case of Seiler and the RAS model. Now, what's happening here? First, we are dealing with a scenario where the audience becomes to get fragmented. because of the intense use of the social media. And it is also under discussion the debate on the deliberation. Is it possible or not? Understanding that this is, as we've always understood, more type of rational deliberation or debate, especially in the use of fragmentation or misinformation, fake news, the polarization. How possible continues to be this normative ideal, and how far is it? Maybe it was always polarized, but maybe today it's even more far away. So we have different ways of understanding polarization. One, the ideological one, the traditional one, that is when we understand. And these are the distances in which people perceive that their parties are. I mean, how wide is the spectrum? How large, how far away are from each other? But I would say that since 10 years or more, most of the studies in Europe and the US have focused much more, well, since since Trump started, it's more related to the effective polarization. So beyond the ideological valorization of the position, of the standing on the opposition, is how far away do I feel from the other? What is the effective emotional distance that I have regarding that other party? That is also something that we wanted to capture in the focuses. We will see that it was not always as easy. Maybe I can show you a little bit about the results, but what happened is that we had, especially as we get closer to the second plebiscite, high difficulty of people to express their differences, to argue, to discuss, to communicate. It became a very conflicted topic that it was highly avoided in the conversation. But this is something we'll check furthermore. Why? Because, well, we have some history, some backup in the public studies. The one from Robert Merton is really important because it's one of the sociologists that has been more highlighted in his generation, made a lot of quantitative research. But Merton, in the case of public opinion studies, would highlight the versatility of the qualitative method, the likelihood of raising subjective and motivational positions. And it was also really connected with the medium reach theories, this idea of social theories that doesn't aspire to be the macro explanatory theory, but not the minimum. Sometimes it's a risk on qualitative research. They should locate on this more intermediate type of position, a medium reach type of theory. I'll go a bit faster on this, but what we wish to understand is the consumption habit of people, political perception, the formation of public opinion, and research questions. I'm going to read them to be a bit more clear with the questions. The first one, what are the consumption habit patterns of information during uncertainty periods in Chile, and how they created public opinion on citizenship? And the second one, that is related with a more methodological aspect, that is related with the advantages that the groups have, advantages and disadvantages in the groups when dealing with these processes with polarization or crisis, in order to collect information or categories that qualitative and quantitative information does not allow us to, especially to understand like the details, because quantitative information provides a little bit more about the general features of the process, like the larger picture, the general picture, but not how this happens in a micro way, or how it's formed throughout time. So 10 focal groups, 76 individuals, between January and November 2023. The last one a little bit before the plebiscite, probably 2 weeks before. And here we have the timeline of the focus. Okay? It's for you to see how, since January, the first one, then May, 3 were carried out, then July, 4 were carried out, and the last two in November. And in December was the plebiscite. Now, what are the findings? One, a mistrust that is very strong when thinking about the institution, including the media also. The media is something we know. We know that the institutional mistrust, well, Media was tracked on that, and also a lot of concern for the impact of the elite, and that is connected to Littman and Thaler in messages and contents coming from the media. So they felt a very strong inequality in terms of the influences coming from the elite, and also a surge of verifying information in such a way that, well, beyond they do it or not, they should manifest this as a narrative in the conversations. So it is very strong, this conversation of and related to policies. We've seen this in some quantitative researchers with the closest groups, family members, friends, not much for the people that escapes that circle, which seems a contradiction because in the public scheme that is only discussed on the in the private environment, and they avoid to communicate it on the public environment and the wider spectrum because of how difficult might make this relationship with them. Well, Facebook, Instagram are the ones highly used in terms of information, looking for information. It's not like one is more than the other, but better yet, the messenger is more valued. These are the ones that they use the most, and for some others, in this need of verifying, Google was like a referee. It was someone, it was mentioned as a referee because of the lack of trust of the information that was being received. And in the case of the second one, there was a strong consciousness on polarization. People would feel this polarization. They, it was amazing how you would avoid speaking about policy with Isabel. I remember we were in the last focus, not long after the elections on the plebiscite, and we were like in the focus for an hour, and no one had said anything about the plebiscite. And this is something that we were doing now, and we put the topic on the table when doing this focus to finally speak about it because they hadn't spoken. And the conversation was very friction, was very difficult. And so when thinking about the qualitative focus, this whole feeling of fear and confrontation to having problems in social media, this was also mentioned to people just to inform themselves. This was being used as information receivers, but they don't wish to participate because of the level of conflict that is many times associated, especially in the political environment. This of looking protective actions when dealing with this content. So how do I verify? How can someone guarantee that what I am seeing is actually true? And in general, the possibility of checking these latent aspects in the mistrust of the media and the public information that sometimes might be more difficult to raise with different methodologies. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to all the speakers from this panel and also to all the attendants on the second floor. We have a lot of people also on the first floor. So if you want to speak with any of the speakers, we have coffee outside the room so you can speak. We don't have much time, so we would appreciate for this opportunity and the attendance of each one of you.